I've advised salespeople at times that they needed to leave their organization because, as successful as they were individually, they were miserable. I'm going to make the case that the A player in one company will be able to compete with the A player in another company. From a safety perspective, wants to hire the industry expert because we think it's a faster ramp up. She says 90% of the time, people regret doing that.
Hello, Sales Nation. I am Will Barron, host of the Salesman Podcast, and welcome to today's episode. On today's show, we have Mike Weinberg, and we're talking about your sales environment and how that affects you as a sales professional, both the bits that you can control and the bits that you can't. When I say you can't, there's always the option to move companies, test the market, and that kind of thing, and we touch on that. So there's nothing that's not within your control when you look at it from that perspective, and I think that's an empowering thought for everyone involved, including myself. Mike himself is a consultant, coach, speaker. His new book has had rave reviews, and that's called Sales Management Simplified. You can find that over on Amazon. You can find out more about Mike over at newsalescoach.com. Everything that we talk about, the books, the links, the other books that Mike mentions throughout the show are available for all the links in the show notes over at salesman.red. And with that, let's jump into today's episode. Hey, Mike, and welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You're more than welcome. So in today's show, I want to talk about creating high-performance environments for salespeople and how we can build, both from the salespeople listening and the sales management listening, exceptional results across the board. So I think for the first place to start with all this, to put it all into perspective, for a salesperson to succeed, do they need a great working environment and support and coaching from management, or is it possible, and obviously a leading question, but is it possible for them to just do it alone?
Yeah, that's a heck of a way to start. Well, let's say this. I think to have significant success, we at least need to start in a neutral environment that isn't anti-sales. If it's a super high performance, healthy pro-sales culture, even better. And I'm sure we'll discuss that as we get on in our dialogue here. But it's really hard. And I've advised salespeople at times that they needed to leave their organization because, as successful as they were individually, they were miserable because it's like every day they were battling against City Hall, and it's like they were playing into the wind on all holes every day. It's really hard to overcome a culture, and when the culture is rooting against you, or you have people, let's say in finance in the organization, who are looking to take your commission away or make deductions or jerk with your territory, or you have an arrogant senior executive who doesn't value salespeople. And I'll tell you the story later of a client where they had a record sales quarter, and the CEO of the company thanked everyone in the company but the salespeople because he thought so lowly of them. So all that is backdrop to say that it's hard to stay a long time in a company that doesn't create the environment for helping you win and appreciating you. And the caution I would share with the listener, particularly the executive listener, there are very few top drawer A-player salespeople. That's one of the crises I feel like we face in sales. There's a shortage of A-player sales talent. So if you have an A player on your team, you want to do everything you can to keep them there, keep them healthy, keep them engaged, keep them happy. And A players don't tolerate unhealthy sales cultures because anyone would hire them. So they're the first ones to leave when the culture becomes so negative and anti-sales. There's no reason for them to stick around because they don't have to.
And let's come on to that for a split second then. Why are there so few A-player salespeople?
Well, that's a biggie. I'll give you a couple theories. One of them has to do just with timing. I'm 48 years old. A lot of my career was in the 90s, the 2000s. There are a lot of people in sales around my age who survived or thrived living in a reactive mode through most of their sales career. They never really had a hunt or work hard to dig up business. They were part of a hot industry or an intriguing product. Or they were selling during a booming economy. Mm-hmm. So they got carried along by the tide. And until the tide went out, no one realized they were standing there naked and they couldn't sell. So there's a lot of people in sales that produce numbers, maybe even for a decade or more, but not because they were super talented. They were just either really relational or technically competent, and they were in the right place at the right time. And when the economy got tough or their industry dried up, that's when we saw who could sell and who can't. And the number, I think, of true A-player salespeople maybe is 10 to 15%. And I think we would have been surprised during a boom economy, or if you were part of a really hot company or selling a hot product, nobody would have admitted their salespeople were not that strong. But today it becomes more obvious.
And so is that 10 or 15% of every salesperson are probably top players?
That's what I'm saying. Yes, I'm saying that 10 to 15% of the entire sales population, we would consider a true A player that year in and year out produces results, takes accountability, responsibility, brings in the number year after year. Yeah.
Okay, so within the industry, we'll narrow this down further and further to what makes them or what environment enables them.
Sure.
But out of that 10%, are most of them within companies that are having massive success, or does most sales teams just have one or two, say they've got 50 sales reps, one or two of them are A players? How does that fit out in the market?
Yeah, I actually see it spread pretty evenly. I mean, a great company that has an outrageous sales culture and a sales executive who's a magnet for talent, that company's going to have a higher percentage of A players. But I go into some pretty crappy companies that still have their share of their 10 or 20% that are A players. They may have a dozen folks, and of the dozen, 1 to 2 are solid A players. And that's pretty standard across all kinds of industries, whether it's old economy or technology or manufacturing. It's kind of across the board.
Okay, from that perspective then, Mike, and this is what really intrigues me about all of this. If you've got 12 people, will one or two of them always become an A player because they are perhaps super competitive, so they've got to be the best to win their little pond? And then if you put them in a bigger pool with other A players, would they be then a B player? What I'm getting at is it all down to perspective, or can you definitely say someone is an exceptional salesperson?
I like how you frame that. I'm going to make the case that the A player in one company will be able to compete with the A player in another company. Because if I took you into all of my clients that I've been in the last, say, 5, 6 years, and I showed you the number one producer, or even the number one and number two producer, the top person in each of those companies, they're all the same. They have similar characteristics, similar drive, competitive nature, business acumen. So I would say that it has to do with the general population, not necessarily nurturing or the culture in that case.
Good stuff. I've always wondered that, and it's interesting to get your insights on it. And
well, no one's asked me that way. It's making me think even deeper on the topic.
Good. And from that perspective, moving on from the fact that if someone's good, they are just good and they can adapt and evolve. From the A players, if they did move to another company, how much of the game, the hustle, the ability they've got, how much of it is it down to being passionate about a specific product? Because and where I'm going with this is, if you are not passionate about your product or service, clearly you're not going to be as good at selling.
Yes.
So is it down to the individual to become passionate about their product, or is that something that management can do and motivate and coach them?
Great question. I think it's management, and it's also what you're bringing to the party in your person. Your own charge, your own batteries. I'm going to answer it by quoting one of my favorite local consultants, who has a search firm here that helped me hire a star A player sales hunter for one of my long-term clients. And at the end of the day, it came down to 2 final candidates. And we went through the whole process with all of them. And it was the industry expert versus the athlete, the natural selling, killing sales machine. And this woman consultant looked at me and my client CEO and said, I know everyone from a safety perspective wants to hire the industry expert because we think it's a faster ramp up. She says 90% of the time, people regret doing that. Always hire the sales athlete. Hire the natural talent. They'll learn the business. You can't teach passion. And I would say I agree with her. An A player is going to be an A player. They know how to sell. They bring that with them. They bring their drive with them. They just need to learn the new market. But I'm with you that you have to have passion because selling is hard. And unlike, I'll make fun of accountants for a minute. At least in the U.S., a miserable accountant can do great work. You can hate your job, work in a miserable culture, not have your heart engaged, but every month produce accurate, on-time financial statements and be a valuable accountant. But you show me the salesperson who's miserable, whose heart's not engaged, who doesn't really want it badly, who's succeeding. You can't, because no one in sales really wins unless they want it. So I'm with you. You have to be passionate, one, internally passionate, and two, for what you're selling, and believe with integrity that what you're selling is going to bring value and improve the condition of your client. In fact, one of my mentors says to me all the time when I'm consulting, he says, if I cannot improve the condition of my client, then I should walk away. Then you have pure motivation. So I'm with you on passion, but I don't know that it's as industry or product specific.
And the reason I ask is because I spoke about this earlier today. I love rotary engine cars. I've got an RX-8. I'd love an RX-7 in the future. And the example I used was if I was selling, and the market's probably not big enough for this job to exist perhaps, but if I was selling rotary parts or for working for a rotary racing team, I would be so passionate. I'd be all over it. I just love the conversations, and the sales would more naturally happen from that than when I was in medical device sales, where I loved the technology. I loved being in theaters. Like my girlfriend's a doctor, my brother's a pharmacist, all my family's in the NHS. And so there is a bit of passion there, but not as much. And so I would have done better in this theoretical sales role with racing cars. So that's why I asked that. But,
I'm with you. I'll tell you, I'll say the story. I'm a Porsche fan. You're a Mazda rotary engine fan. They built a Porsche driving facility in Atlanta, Georgia. And as soon as it came up, I put something out on Twitter almost as a joke. If you run your sales team meeting at the Porsche facility, I'll come do it for free if you pay for me to drive. Okay? Well, this one company who I happened to become friendly with the owner, they took me up on the offer. They flew me to Atlanta. And for what it cost them to bring me in and pay for me to drive for a few hours was maybe 10% of my normal fee. But I had as much fun. My heart was more engaged. I helped them with everything I had. It went so well. They just asked me last month, would I do the same deal again? Now, I couldn't make a living doing this. but I said, yes, I had so much fun at the Porsche facility that for 10% of what it would, my fee would have been, I went and did that meeting for them because I was passionate. So I'm with you. Your passion drives you. But A players are passionate people generally, and they're going to bring that with them to a new environment.
Well, I'll tell you what, my next car, probably going alongside this one, because the RX-8 I've got at the moment will become a track car. It's probably going to be a Cayman S. So we'll reconvene the conversation at that point with Porsche.
Conversation, yeah.
Okay, so motivation. This is what intrigues me further, in that if salespeople that are A players are passionate, they're self-motivated, clearly they're competitive, and sales management can play on that. In 2016, are commissions still the best way to motivate salespeople, or does the environment need to be more nurturing, and does it need to be a more complex solution than that?
Yeah, we're gonna offend some people no matter how we answer this question.
Good.
Yeah, and I'm a long way from the egalitarian, paternalistic, communistic view of sales leadership. I think commission and earning is still very important to most top producers. A lot of top people are driven by money. More than money, they're driven by return on time. Many are driven by their competitive spirit. I think it's a combination of all of those. But I am still a fan when it comes to compensation of a leveraged plan. And I have a chapter in my book, and it basically says that compensation and complacency start with the same four letters. And there are a lot of very odd compensation plans I run into that don't pay top producers much more than bottom producers. The plans are too flat, which I think accomplishes the exact opposite of what a good plan would. We want our top producers to be very satisfied and very well compensated, so they're not even thinking about leaving. And we want our bottom producers to be hungry, uncomfortable, thinking about changing their behavior to raise their game or deselecting themselves. We have compensation plans that the commission is the same for babysitting a customer we sold years ago as it is the same commission rate for doing the hard work of bringing in a new customer. That doesn't make sense. So it's a long answer to a simple question. I think pay and comp does matter. And to go back to your A player comment, your best people are always the best at working the compensation plan to their advantage, which is why we need compensation plans that actually drive the behavior and move people towards the results, which are a win-win for the company.
So a sales management just too soft with how they're babying the people who aren't performing as high. And we can be totally blunt about all this, because anyone who's seeking out a podcast to improve themselves at sales are probably likely going to be in that top 10, 20%. So they're going to be like shaking their fists and cheering as we say all this. But yeah, a sales manager is just too soft.
Some are too soft. Some of it has to do with the role of sales manager has devolved in the name of being lean. And this is a lot of what I get at in the first half of Sales Management Simplified. A lot of senior executives or executives over sales have forgotten the primary role of the frontline sales manager. So sometimes they come across as soft because they're buried in so much other crap that the company has loaded on them. They're going to meetings that have nothing to do with leading the sales team. They're sitting in strategy sessions. They're planning parties. They're fighting customer service fires. I have one sales executive, sales manager client of mine who is a QC expert in his plastics company. And every time there's a problem with a part, he's the first one to run into the plant and get the engineers together. And on the surface, it seems great that he's a team player, but I want to kill him because the one ball he can't take his eye off on is the ball of leading the sales team. And when he's in the factory fighting a QC fire, trying to improve quality, that's not helping me help him lead his sales team. So sometimes they're too soft. Sometimes they're too hard because there's a lot of abuse when some of these either publicly traded companies where the quarter is, that's a deadline of death if you don't make your quarterly numbers. And I've got some smaller company clients that are owned by private equity, we call it PE here in the States. And a lot of time those people are brutal. I mean, they're managing by a spreadsheet, by a financial statement. They don't care about the heart engagement. So all the pressure, the pressure flows from the private equity owners to the executive team down to the sales manager. And then he turns around and just blasts the salespeople because his butt's on the line all the time. So it's both. They can be distracted. They can be too soft, but they can also be totally disconnected from their own people's heart engagement because they're under so much pressure to produce results as well.
For the salesperson listening then, what should they see the sales manager doing? Because I've been in different companies that I've had sales managers who've been very hands-on, been out in the field, have covered my arse when I've messed up, and that's the sales manager that even though it can perhaps be painful when you've got someone sat over your shoulder, as long as they are adding to it and helping close the deal, of course they're helping you make money. They're enabling that. So that's always how I want sales managers to be. But I've also had sales managers that are very hands off. I can't remember his name now. Not that I'd shout him out, but he clearly just wanted to go as fast as he can up the corporate ladder. So he spent no time with a sales rep. He spent all his time with senior management, sucking up to them, and clearly he was just a horrible manager. Where should the sales manager be day to day? Should they be out in the field, and we're talking about outside reps here, perhaps in the B2B world?
First of all, I applaud you for asking this. I'm on a mission. I'm on a crusade to remind senior executives and sales managers what the primary job is. I'm going to answer it first in the negative. I'll tell you the two things that your sales manager should not be doing as much of, and that's leading you by email and living as a desk jockey with their head buried in a CRM screen, because that's not leading anybody anywhere. And the fact that we send threatening email after threatening email about updates to the CRM and where are you on this deal, and emails on Sundays and emails at 3:00 in the morning, I've had it. So if that's how you're being managed, you're not being led anywhere by anybody. If you want my opinion, and I make the best case I can in the second half of the book, that the three highest value, highest payoff activities for a sales manager are in this order: one-on-one meetings with your people. And those one-on-one meetings there are two types in my opinion. One would be the results and pipeline accountability meeting. And the second type would be a coaching meeting where we're maybe doing deal strategy or working on a sales skill or doing some type of business planning. So number one, highest value activity. And when this is done well, this can transform a culture and the results, one-on-one meetings. Number two, field work, working alongside your salesperson. I don't know how that's become optional today because sales managers are dragged into every other function, and all those meetings we talked about earlier, they spend almost no time in the field alongside their salespeople, visiting with customers, making sales calls, coaching in the field, and connecting at high levels with customers. And if it's an inside sales team, I still think I wouldn't call it field work, but I still want you to work with your salespeople in their cubicle, in their office, sit next to them. That's how you coach. That's how you observe. So number one is one-on-one meetings. Number two is coaching / field work. And then number three is a lost art. It's the sales team meeting, where maybe it's weekly, maybe it's monthly, maybe it's quarterly, depending on the type of business, where you gather as a team to inspire and educate and align and envision and equip the salespeople to do their job better. And I see sales teams that either don't meet, or I see managers that use that meeting as an abusive accountability session in a totally inappropriate manner. The sales team meeting is not for accountability. That's to build up your team and to encourage their hearts and to let them share best practices and to do training. And so they leave the meeting better equipped and more energized to do their jobs. So my challenge to everyone listening is, what would happen to results? How much more satisfied would salespeople be, and how far could we move the needle if sales management spent the majority, say 60, 70, 80% of the time, one-on-one meetings in accountability and coaching, field work alongside working with their people, and then in team preparing for or conducting really good team meetings that aligned, energized, and equipped the team? How different would results be, and what would it feel like to be in sales?
Mike, let me ask you something here, and we'll wrap up this part of the show with this question. Are sales managers generally, and this is only coming to me as you're pulling out the traits of a good sales manager as you say what they should be doing day to day. Are most sales managers promoted for the wrong reasons? Are they promoted because they're good salespeople rather than the fact that they are good coaches?
For the most part, yes.
And is that a serious problem in the industry? Because I know from my experience, it's been you hit a wall with your the amount that you can bring in from hitting target or going over it, which you alluded to here. That shouldn't be a wall. It shouldn't be a financial barrier to you being more successful and bringing in more business. They hit this, and then they go, well, the next step is management. Or then they go, well, I don't want to be driving around in my car all week. I've got young kids. I'll go into management. Should those people, are people being promoted for just the wrong reasons? And how do we get around that?
I hate to paint with a very broad brush, but I'm going to answer your question this way. And I do deal with this in a very specific chapter in the book because I live this. I live the transition from top producing salesperson to sales manager. And I lived it in a very tough environment where I had to serve an interim role where I was both. I was a selling manager or the player coach, which is an impossible job. It's not just that they're getting promoted for the wrong reason. It's really different characteristics that make you a great manager or leader than make you a great salesperson. And I would make the case, the only thing similar about the sales manager job and the salesperson job is the word sales. The individual producer, salesperson, they thrive when they're selfish and self-focused and worried about their time, their calendar, their commission, their customers. I want selfish driven. You asked earlier, I never got to answer the question, but are A players too demanding? The good ones are. They're because they know how to maneuver in a good way. I'm not questioning their integrity. They're selfish with their time. They're very productive. You go into management, you can't be selfish with your time. You can't close your door or work remotely. You win through your people. You don't win on your own. So you have to be accessible and available, and you have to realize that you're not the hero. You're the hero maker. So in that case, when you have the high ego salesperson who gets promoted to sales manager and they're still trying to be the hero, they're actually deflating their own salespeople, right? They're discouraging their hearts, or they end up competing for the glory with their salespeople, and that's a disaster. That's a mess. So does that get to the answer? I see you're nodding. You may have lived through something like this, like I have. Yeah.
I've never went into management, and I never would, because in the last sales role I was in, I saw the manager make that transition. I saw the stress that he was under, and essentially, seemingly from the outside looking in, he went from a great salesperson to average manager, more stress, more hassle, less barrier between getting just shit thrown at him from above, because obviously the sales manager's job is to protect their team from some of that. And yeah, so I've not been through it myself, but I can appreciate it. And why I wanted to bring that up was for all the salespeople listening who think that it's the next logical step. Perhaps you're not in the right company if you've not got the options to go bigger with your sales, if that's the hold up. But yeah, I think it's an important thing to look at, because it seems like it's the natural progression. Clearly, it isn't always the right one. And with that, Mike, I've got a couple of questions I ask everyone that comes on the show. The first one, who do you think is the world's greatest salesperson?
Wow. I need to think about that. Could be the Disney company or someone who gets us to spend such money. I need to think about that. I will tell you this. I've worked with, in almost every client, I can find someone who's a better salesperson than I am. I know more because I study sales and I'm in and out of all these companies. But I see some really gifted people that naturally connect with buyers, and they learn the buyer's businesses so fast, and they're so great at uncovering pain and opportunity, and then articulating value and telling the story and putting the pieces together, or quarterbacking the deal through their own company, that I'm amazed. I shake my head. And part of what I love doing in my job is getting to work with those top producers and sharing their best practices with each other. But I don't have an answer for you. Who's the best seller? I need to think about that.
Well, let's stop on this for a second then, just a very brief second. If you, and not necessarily you, but if an expert knows more about the industry, they know more about the just general business acronym, they understand profit and losses and all this kind of stuff that salespeople struggle with but should know. What's the difference then, how you've described? Is it emotional intelligence, or is there some kind of weird X factor that we can't narrow down what exactly it is?
It's a combination. It's yes, emotional intelligence. EQ is huge. You don't hear people talk about emotional intelligence enough, but it's EQ combined with drive, combined with some level of business acumen. And it depends, is it a low level type sales job where it's very transactional, and endurance and resilience is more important than business acumen and sophistication? It could be. There's so many kinds of sales jobs. I'm hesitant to paint with that really broad brush again. Because I see, and I don't mean this as an insult in any way, I see some medium intellect, even medium EQ people thrive in certain types of sales roles, because what's required in that job is more hustle or more competitiveness. When in some of the more nuanced jobs where we're calling on much higher level people or selling very complex long sales cycle, like I watched one of your great podcasts talking just recently about long sales cycle. You had some great experts on there. I think you had Shane Gibson, and I'm also looking at the one you did with my friend Tibor from Toronto. That's a different touch. So I'm hesitant to say what the magic bullet or the secret sauce is for the top producer. It depends on the job, and it depends on the environment.
So is the magic bullet then the job and environment, choosing one and focusing one that just suits you and your personality?
Yes, and there's a guy named Mark Roberge. He wrote a book called The Sales Acceleration Formula. He's an MIT educated engineer, brilliant man. His book and my book are both phenomenal sales management books, completely different takes. Mine is all anecdotal, and his is all written from an engineering perspective. And his argument is what you're saying, and I agree with it, that every job's a little different, and we want to engineer the job role and the job description to the talent requirements necessary in that particular job. One of my frustrations, I write about this in the book in great detail, is when management takes a one-size-fits-all approach to sales talent management. I mean, even I'll just take the simplest case, forget the complex case. Why do we think that someone who's wired like a farmer, like a zookeeper, who loves to nurture animals or tend to crops and is a caretaker, right, who hates violence and loves relationships, why do we think that person is going to succeed putting down the baby bottle that they would normally, feed a little baby animal with, and picking up a weapon to go out and shoot animals. It's a totally different gift set and desire. And yet we also have sales hunters who are terrible relationally, who don't do a good job managing ongoing projects or relationships or service. But we have so few of them, and they're out in the field. And when they kill something, instead of freeing them up to go kill the next thing, like idiots, we bring them back to the office and make them cook it and then clean up, serve the guests and then clean up after dinner. What would happen even within one company if they further define the sales roles to a level where people got to do what they were best at and all the jobs got done for the company and for the customer?
And is that where we're heading? Because I've had a couple of people on the show to talk about this recently. Are we heading down the route of SDRs with people who just manage accounts? Is this going to be just commonplace throughout the industry in the next few years?
I don't know, but it's sure a hot topic. That sales development playbook by Trish Bertuzzi is just out for a few months. It's probably the best written book I've read in months. And it's SDRs and sales development reps, but it's bigger than that. Well, I'm trying to keep the conversation because there's always the flavor of the day. We went through the inbound marketing craze, and then we went through the social selling craze. And finally, I think the fire has been put out and people have woken up and said, maybe all that data they were spewing at us wasn't right. Maybe, just maybe, not every buyer goes 2/3 through the buying process before engaging a salesperson. And I'll make the argument that was a stupid statistic anyway, because it was only true when the lazy reactive salesperson was sitting on his ass waiting for a lead or waiting for the customer to call you in. My clients aren't waiting. They're proactively attacking. Let's go talk to people before they're shopping, before they're a lead. So that, I'm always hesitant of the hot trend. So I don't know whether it's going to all go to specialization and SDRs, but I think it's a conversation I'm happy management is having, because clearly people are gifted differently. And if there's several jobs and we can put the right people in the right roles and achieve better results, I'd rather have the more complicated structure with various roles, but have a lot more performance than try to oversimplify everything and have one person, one job, and everyone does the same thing. That's stupid to me.
Good stuff. Really interesting your take on that, and I think there's room for a whole other show in the future to dive into that with you, Mike. And I've got one final question for you, something to ask everyone that comes on the show. If you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at sales?
Go for it. Go for it earlier. Go for it sooner. Trust your gut. The biggest mistakes I've made in my own sales career were when I deferred on a question of sales process or seniority, and I let someone else drive something that I knew was going the wrong direction. And I would tell young people, and I would tell myself, if you know you're good at this and you have some natural affinity and you can perceive the situation, don't let someone who's more senior or better entrenched in a relationship lead you astray if you know you're right. And I can tell you stories in my past of where I deferred and I ended up losing or getting embarrassed because we didn't attack it the right way. And I don't. That's an area I won't defer anymore. I'm going to put my fingerprints on the sales process and how we approach it, because I know I'm good at that and my gut is good, and I'm going to trust my gut.
Amazing stuff. Mike, tell us a bit about both books, because I think they're both relevant for our audience, and then where we can find out more about you as well. Yeah,
thanks. Happy to do that. You can find out more about me. My website and my blog are both at newsalescoach.com, newsalescoach.com. I'm very active on Twitter. Got lots of friends in Europe, especially in the UK. It's Mike_Weinberg, Weinberg. My first book was New Sales Simplified. It's my very simple framework for putting together a successful new business development focused sales attack. I take away any of the mystery about what is prospecting and how do you get a meeting with someone, how do you tell your story and articulate value, how do you conduct a great sales call and make sure we do enough probing before we present, and then how do you put it all together in a business plan. It's very simple. I'm shocked at the response to that book. It's been a bestseller for 4 years, and it's almost got 300 reviews up on Amazon right now. So New Sales Simplified. And then I wrote my most recent book, Sales Management Simplified. It came out just last fall. It's got over 100 reviews already, And that is my very, very blunt truth directed at senior executives and sales managers, some of the topics which we tackled here together. Thank you for bringing those up. That book's divided in two distinct parts. The first part is me screaming at executives and managers about they're the reason their sales team isn't succeeding. Don't point your finger at the sales team until you fix your culture, your sales roles, your compensation, the way you micromanage, your sales team meetings, all the things that go into dysfunction from a leadership perspective on sales. And then the second half of the book unpacks the framework you and I were discussing and how should a sales manager spend his or her time? How do you create a healthy culture? Those 3 high-value activities we talked about. And then some very important sales management responsibilities, pointing the team in the right direction, arming the team with the weapons they need, and then monitoring the battle. So that's Sales Manager Simplified, and I'd be honored if your listeners check that out on Amazon. Thank you.
Amazing stuff. Well, we'll link to all that in the show notes over at salesman.red for anyone who is on a treadmill or in a car trying to scribble things on the back of the hand at the moment. And with all that said, Mike, I want to thank you for your time today, genuinely, and I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Oh my goodness, you're awesome. This was a total treat. Big cheers from the Central U.S. to you and your audience. I'm honored to join you. Thank you.
And there we have it, Mike. Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it. Thank you, Sales Nation. As always, there'd be no show if you guys weren't listening. And I thought this was a good one. I thought it was important to just re-emphasize in this last closing statement that everything is within your control. I've done it. I didn't like how I was treated by one sales manager. Basically, someone got sacked and got replaced. He was an arsehole. And so I shifted companies. And I was far better off for making that move rather than struggling along and being miserable. So I just wanted to mention that, empower you guys. And with all that said, I'll speak with you all again tomorrow.